Lydia DePillis, a reporter with ProPublica, who has written a piece on how dozens of Trump's political appointees will stay in government after Biden takes over. Lydia, are you there?
Hi, I'm
Hi.
here.
Well, welcome to the program, Lydia. I'm here with Emma Vigeland. Thanks for joining us.
Sure.
So, Lydia, we should start off by saying that this practice of borrowing, as it's known, this happens at the end of every administration to some degree or another, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It's sort of a natural thing, right? You get brought into an administration as a political appointee, which just means that you serve at the pleasure of the president. And then you maybe want to take a job that isn't one of those political appointments because you want to stick around. And it's not necessarily nefarious. And it does happen at the end of every administration. And the reason it has a sort of formal term is because over the years, the Office of Personnel Management has decided to apply various processes to make sure that these jobs are not being handed out with a lot of political preference at play, because these are folks who have demonstrated that they are friends with the administration. They are chosen for that reason. So there's certainly the potential for political influence, but plenty of them are benign.
Well, now, what do you mean by political? What do you mean by that? Political preference?
So there's like 4,000 people at the outset of an administration who are political appointees. Only about 1,000 of them are actually Senate confirmed. So many of these people are in important managerial positions, but they don't rise to any kind of public radar. And, you know, historically, centuries ago, these jobs were handed out through the patronage system. And to some extent, that still happens, right? And it happened in the Obama administration. People who were field workers, like campaign staff, all of a sudden it's like, let's find you a place because reward for good service. And that's totally allowed. The thing that is more problematic is when those jobs, those people then are converted into jobs that are part of the career civil service, which come with a great deal of protections because these people are supposed to be non-political. They serve from administration to administration. And it's actually sort of difficult to fire them.
And do we know, I mean, can you tell us what the numbers are? Like, I know we have 2 million people who work in the federal government, more or less on some level, but that includes like postal workers and everybody. And I imagine this group of people that we're talking about, they come in as political appointees. There's 4,000 of them. Ostensibly, they're supposed to leave, but then some stay on because they want a career job, or at least for a period of time, they want that career job. And so, I mean, how many, like, is there a number in there of like that type of position where they would go into an agency, get the civil service job? Do we have a sense of like how many like possible positions there are like that?
Oh, I mean, it's potentially very large, right? Like the civil service is tens and thousands of people. And so the actual number of requests that OPM gets from the administration to put its political appointees into these jobs is pretty small. So they started requiring in 2010, like all of those positions had to be reviewed. So there is a list of people who are making these transitions, and it's submitted to Congress, and it's usually not made public. The GAO, the Government Accountability Office, does take a look at these every term or so, or whenever a president leaves office. The last time they did this, which was in 2016, they found that there was something like 99 requests to transition people over that entire period, 2015 or 2010 to 2016, to get people who were political appointees in the Obama administration into civil service jobs. And so there was like 100 of them, and they rejected a bunch of them. And some of them didn't end up taking the job. So the point is that it's actually a fairly small pool of people who try to make this transition. Right.
What is that figure relative to the Trump administration? You say there's 100 between those 6 years. where are we now in the Trump administration? We still have another, 3 or 4 weeks. And so this could keep going on, but where are we at this point?
Truly. So, from what I've understood, I have the number for 2019. It's like about 33. I have the lists for the first 3 quarters of this year. That's another approximately 33, like with a few sort of on the edges of people who were declining the positions or were denying the positions. And so, that adds up to like somewhere in the range of like 60, 70 for last year and this year. And that might be, it sounds like, oh, well, that's only 2 years compared to 6 years. So there's a gazillion more. That's probably not the case. I think probably more of them end up coming through later in the term. It does take a while for these people to be approved. So we won't know the total number probably until like early next year, when the GAO reports. But anyway, the point is that it's not far out of line.
Okay. I mean, it's 6 years versus 4 years, but I guess, if we get up to about 100, it's going to be, I guess more or less in that respect. And of course, if you're not leaving the administration, there's less of an urgency, I guess, to get you in there. Right. I mean, so those first 2 years of that 6 years that are, well, all right. So let me ask you this. And here's, I guess, the thing that it becomes, sort of, you've mentioned there are 4,000 of these political appointments that the Biden administration has to fill. Mm-hmm. And then ostensibly there's work to be done. So the resources that can be dedicated to observing who these people are and making sure they're not they're not carrying out an agenda that is more aligned with Donald Trump and the Republicans than the Biden administration is a difficult task. I mean, it sounds like it wouldn't, but it's like we've got to dedicate resources to actually doing stuff rather than sort of this rear guard effort and making sure that these people aren't sort of destroying the furniture, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's interesting because like this is a very small window into the sort of potential destroying the furniture that could happen in this lame duck period. And it happens to be that it is carefully tracked by OPM. Like, I'm actually not sure it's the biggest way or channel through which that will happen. I don't have evidence of any conscious plan that the Trump administration is trying to insert its operatives all over the government. I don't think that this is very directed, honestly. I think it's a lot of probably ideological folks with pretty partisan credentials who wish to continue their government service. And that will probably mean that wherever they are, they'll be able to like slow down regulations. If they're in the judicial branch, right? I don't want to say skew, but like push judges in the direction of more conservative rulings. And so that's certainly at play. I just think that there's at the same time a whole rulemaking process that is moving very quickly that will also be very difficult for the Biden folks to roll back or stop. So I don't want to leave folks with the impression that this is the only way in which Trump administration influence could remain to bedevil the Biden folks.
All right. Well, I want to talk about the other channels in the rulemaking in a second. We'll touch on that, but the big concern, and I have no doubt. Well, let me put it this way: it's not hard for me to imagine that this is not directed by some type of significant plan, based upon just what we've observed of the Trump administration. Even when they're doing what I would consider horribly nefarious things, they very often botch it. How many Supreme Court cases have we had where the court has just been like, had you come to us and done actually handed in your homework in the proper way, we would have ruled in your favor, but we're not going to now. You can come back and provide us a better answer. But there has been a stated agenda by this administration. Steve Bannon announced it very early, the destruction of the administrative state. When Barack Obama has political appointees who go into these positions, presumably these positions, presumably, although I would imagine there's some exceptions to this rule, they're doing it because they want to strengthen these agencies that they're getting placed in. They believe in the mission of these agencies. To what extent? I mean, and we can go over some of the individuals that you flagged in your piece that might sort of like bring some of this out, but it seems to me like these are people who are going in and building a bank of, maybe they're doing it for ideological reasons, maybe they're doing it for career reasons that are outside of the civil service even, but going in, building a bank of favors for the corporations that these agencies are established to regulate, right? I mean, like there is a specific reason why these agencies exist, and it is to curb what the private individuals or players are doing.
Yeah. So a couple things that I would say in response to that. One, an advocate mentioned this to me, and I didn't end up the piece, but there was actually quite a few more people who ended up burrowing after the Bush administration. And the theory for that, and I don't have any proof, but I think this makes sense, is that the Bush folks actually believed in the mission or the utility of government, even if they had different values for what exactly than like the Obama administration from the approach that government agencies should take. But they believe in the power of government to like accomplish their goals. And the difference with the Trump folks is that there's a ton of turnover. So it's not like and there's a lot of people who are like cycling in and out, and a lot of these positions that were just left empty, right? Of the 4,000, I'm not sure all of them were ever even filled. And it's because the reasons you usually heard from agency heads is, well, we don't really need to do that job. So like, why would we make those appointments? Why would we fill those positions? And so the hypothesis is there may be fewer Trump administration folks going into the civil service because there's just less belief in government as having the power to accomplish whatever agenda that they have. And the other point I would make is that, like, sure, Republican administrations, especially this one, tend to be pretty corporate friendly, although there's like caveats to that, right? Like the corporate lobby has been very mad at the Trump administration for any number of actions on like immigration and trade, et cetera. But that like the revolving door is just such a much bigger issue. Like
right.
That happens with Democrats and Republicans, and the incentives to go out into a lobbying shop or to do favors on behalf of your boss, like who in the Senate or the House. I mean, those are just really, really powerful. And like, this is a very small piece of that.
Right. So that's just quickly my question, right? So in your piece, you talk about how a lot of these boroughs appointments were lobbyists in the past. Mm-hmm. Is that different substantively than past appointments in the Obama and Bush administrations, like what you're talking about?
I mean, if your definition of lobbyists includes folks who advocate for labor unions, environmental groups, consumer groups, which I do, you're right. I don't think like all lobbyists are bad. I think they're just advocates for whatever interest that is paying them. So absolutely, Obama hired from the ranks of those folks and probably gave them civil service jobs later, right? I mean, it's not something I think it's sort of unreasonable to expect people who go into government to have a completely technocratic background. Like lots of people work for different interests. I think it's the really problematic thing is when people pull strings and engage in an uncompetitive process. So folks who don't have that kind of pedigree and those kinds of connections, but who are more qualified, can't get the job. And like one person I would highlight who I did lead the story with is a young man by the name of Christopher Prandoni, who's in his early 30s. And, you know, he worked for his first job out of college was working for Americans for Tax Reform, Grover Norquist's group, which is like quite ideological. He is head of their energy shop there. And their primary goal is preventing regulations, especially around, you know, early, at that time, one of the big debates was around whether to do a carbon tax. And so, you know, he made his way through the Council on Environmental Quality and then to the Department of the Interior, where he was an advisor to the secretary, and now has a civil servant's appointment as an administrative law judge, deciding a lot of the land use disputes within the Bureau of Land Management. And that's a job that he could stay in forever, however long, like until the Biden administration gets around to relocating him or something. But that is a position, that one of thousands in the federal government that has real consequences for, how public lands are used.
I want to get to I want to just go a little deeper into Prandoni and also how the Biden administration could, if they get around to it after dealing with the 4,000 that they've got to hire and the pandemic, which is probably and the potential for the recession. It's funny though, the idea that they did not fill those 4,000. Do we have any sense of the Trump administration of how many of those positions actually did get filled? Because I can't help but remember a story early on in the transition when the Trump administration came in, and Jared Kushner apparently walked into the White House, one part of the White House, and was looking around and going like, okay, so who stays and who goes? And whoever was giving him the tour said, everybody goes. These are all political appointees.
It's one of those wonderful anecdotes about how little this administration understood about government when they came in. And I don't have that number. The Partnership for Public Service may have tracked it. It's one of those things that is very irritatingly not tracked. Like there's no central repository of appointments made to those positions that I'm aware of. I think
that's sort of amazing, isn't it?
It is, right? Like
because we don't have a sense of like the competence, even never mind the actual impact of what they're doing. We don't have the competence to even know like how competent they are just from an administrative standpoint.
Yeah. I mean, so there's like something called the Plum Book, which is this like large government GPO publication that lists every appointment that's political. There is, and many of the departments have their own lists of politicals at certain points in time that have come out through Freedom of Information Act requests. But it's like the different pieces of the elephant that you're trying to like look at to get a sense of how many jobs were filled. Because all of the early trackers on this really only did the ones that are Senate confirmed. Right. And there's much, it just goes much deeper than that.
So this, okay, I'm sorry. So I wanted to jump to this Prandoni. He is now been appointed to be a judge from his experience. I guess he's 3 years out of law school. His experience was working in Grover Norquist's shop, as it were, which was all just about, here's your portfolio, and you want to just put out a couple of position papers on why we shouldn't have regulation, essentially. Stop me if I'm mischaracterizing it. He gets appointed to the Associate Director for Natural Resources on the Council on Environmental Quality. I'm just going to guess that he said the environment's quality is fine. In fact, we're overreaching. We're making it too good. In some respects, or we have more of a margin of error than one would imagine. That's just a guess, but I imagine that's what he was doing. And so now he is a judge. What does he do as a judge in that? Like, I mean, give us a sense of like what the implications are of this Grover Norquist acolyte, his sitting in that position. How big are the cases that he's hearing? What are the implications, the real world implications?
They're not, these are pretty day-to-day matters. I mean, I haven't, the appointment was only made over the summer, and, talking to environmental advocates on this, they couldn't point to like one big thing that is before the commission, which is also sort of slowed down because of the pandemic. Right. And so it's hard to say what exactly the impact has been so far or will be, but there are, the kinds of things like, who has rights under oil leases and coal leases. So, it's I think a lot of this is too soon to tell. There is a list that I'm hoping to get from last year which would illuminate people who've been in their jobs longer and may have more time to make an impact. I just think that at this point, it's not clear to me, which doesn't mean that there hasn't been an impact.
Let's tell us about some of the other people that you highlighted in the in your piece. You talk about Gregory Sheehan.
Yeah, Gracian is was deputy director of the Fish and Wildlife Service and functionally the head of it because there was no director because Ryan Zinke at the time couldn't appoint Sheehan to be the director because he didn't have there's apparently you have to have a scientific degree to be the director of the Fish and Wildlife Service. So instead he just functionally ran the agency as the deputy and did a lot of things like opening public lands for access to hunting and fishing, which is like not the worst thing, but it's not necessarily protective. And then the thing that environmental groups have been most concerned about is significantly weakening some of the Environmental Species Act rules around critical habitat. So those are things that are going to require attention by the Biden administration if they wish to reverse them. And he left the agency somewhat early, spent a year hanging out in Utah, where he's from, and then popped up again when he was appointed to be head of the Utah State Bureau of Land Management chapter. And in that position, he's actually slowed down some of the leases that were in the works for some of those big public land tracts out there, including Bears Ears National Monument, which was really controversial when they shrank it early in the term. But environmental groups just really don't like this guy, really think that he's going to shepherd through a bunch of the leases that the Trump administration had put into motion earlier on.
Is there anyone else who really stood out for you as someone who was sort of a zealot getting in there and looking to, in many ways, undermine what, at least, I think these agencies philosophically should be there. If they're going to err, they should err on the side of protecting the commons that we have tasked them to protect. Are there any zealots that you, or any folks that you perceive who are particularly set on preventing the agency from doing that to the extent that they can?
Yeah. So I would hesitate to use the word zealot, but like at least folks who, have a different agenda from the ones the Biden folks will bring in when they take office. And the highest profile one of these that came to light was, and this had been reported before, but like not extensively, is a gentleman named Tracy Short, who had been the principal legal director at the Department of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and had spent his career in government basically prosecuting immigration fraud and defending the government, usually again in cases where they were trying to keep people from entering the country. And so he was appointed to be the chief immigration judge, which is a role that basically runs the courts of immigration judges. There's 30 something of them, and determines the rules that they have to play by and who gets what caseloads. And so obviously, there's been an enormous backlog of cases for years now. And the way that they're dealing with that now is just accelerating the review of those cases in ways that judges have told me, or former judges have told me, makes it really difficult for them to consider the facts of every case. And so, and that's a job, that's a career job. So like they can move him, but it is going to require individual specific attention. It doesn't happen automatically.
How will the Biden administration, how do you move someone in civil service? You just put them in a different job, essentially?
Yeah. I mean, the way that it's usually been explained to me is that you can't fire them because you don't like the job that they're doing, but you can say, we are transferring you to the FOIA office or to some place that is like very undesirable. Or like, this is what they did with a whole office of the USDA that does economics research. They said, your jobs are in
Yes.
I think it was Wyoming or something.
Yes.
Like
They
like
moved
big
everybody
plain
from
state.
Washington. They said, we're going to
Right.
move the office there. And if you don't want to join us, then you don't have to.
Exactly. And that was widely perceived as a way of just thinning out the office because they didn't like economic analyses on a lot of because they were doing a lot of things about climate change and like food stamps. And so that's usually how it would have to be done. Now, the Trump administration has issued an executive order called the Schedule F thing.
Yes.
That allows them to, requires agencies to designate anyone with policy advocating roles to be put on this new schedule that kind of makes them this like liminal thing in between a political appointee and a civil service person, and makes it much easier to transfer them or fire them. And so, that could have been like very damaging if the Trump administration remained in place. They probably don't have enough time to really act on it, although it is happening. But if Biden wanted to keep it around, he could use it to make some initial changes much more quickly than he otherwise would have been able to, although he's under a lot of pressure from unions to just scrap it immediately.
I see what you're saying. So essentially, Schedule F places a significant portion of these otherwise protected employees under a sort of like a quasi status that Biden could fire them without the civil service protections. Yeah. Okay. But unions want to get rid of that because it's a dangerous thing to keep around. This is what I vote for. Keep it for a year, clean up, and then jettison Schedule F. But I know no one's asking my vote on that. All right. Well, thank you so much for this, Lydia. We will put a link to this piece on majority.fm, how dozens of Trump's political appointees will stay in government after Biden takes over. Thanks so much for your time today. Really interesting.
No problem. Thank you.